Well, Adam, you've got your second Emmy nomination this year. Your first one go around, you actually won an Emmy back for 30 Rock a few years ago. Tell us about getting this one for the first episode of Fargo.
Um, it was absolutely a joy to get nominated. I guess for this, it was a lot of work went into it over a bunch of months, and was very happy with the results. So it's always great when you spend a lot of time directing to get recognition for it. Very flattering.
Well, you've done a lot of work, especially on TV. And when this project came to you, tell us from the first moment after you say yes, what's the process like for you, especially when it's the first episode in a project?
Well, what's great about being the director on a pilot, doing the originating episode as opposed to, both activities are fun. I enjoy doing episodes of shows and I enjoy doing pilots, but I think the task is different. When you're doing a pilot, there's a sort of a much larger part of the pie that you're involved with, because you're involved in setting up the main characters and the recurring characters, and you're deciding what this environment's going to look like and what the color palette's going to be and how you're going to light it, and what the camera style is going to be. And there's a lot of design work involved and a lot more prep work, but it's very rewarding. It gets a little bit more like doing a movie than just doing an episode. When you're doing an episode of a show, your task is to do a great episode, but you're not redesigning their universe. You're not recasting their program. So did that answer the question, or did I just veer off?
No, that's good. Since you are involved from the very beginning, do you also participate in the casting?
Yes. Well, there was I think I signed on maybe 6 or 7 months before we actually started, before we went to Canada and actually started prepping it. So there were, extensive conversations about casting, and we tested a bunch of actresses. I mean, obviously for Billy Bob and Martin, those went out as offers. But then for the part of Molly, Rachel Tenner, the casting director in L.A., I think she said she had over 2,000 submissions, and lots of great people came in to read. And Allison Tolman is someone that Rachel is from Chicago, and I think it's someone that she tracked down through her Chicago contacts. And she came in on tape first, and everyone was just, flipped, because she was just, she captured the tone of the material so perfectly, and she was funny, but she was real, and she had this great face, and she was immediately one of the top contenders for the producers. And then there were some tests done in New York, and she ended up being who everyone wanted, and especially FX wanted her too, I think.
You set her career definitely in motion.
Yeah, well, she's got a ton of talent, and she completely rose to the occasion. I think on the first day of shooting, she's there with Keith Carradine and a lot of really experienced actors who've been doing it for years and years and years, and here she is, like her very first day. I mean, I think she had done some parts in movies and maybe a scene in the TV. She hadn't done a lot of stuff, and here she was, like, day one, being like third most important person on this TV series, and whatever was going on internally, you didn't see it in the performance. She was so fantastic and just had such poise, and every day of shooting she was like that. She did amazing.
On any project, when you're directing and you've got somebody fairly new versus somebody that's been doing this a while, do you direct them differently? Do you have different ways that you talk to people?
I think when someone's like fairly new, I think generally you just have to be aware of what's going through their mind, which is the salty pros who have been doing it for decades are very confident, and I think the person who's brand new, I think the worst thing you can do is create an atmosphere where you're transmitting any kind of tension or urgency. My thought is when you're dealing with someone who's a brand new actor or someone who's under a lot of pressure in it, is that you treat the situation in the most casual way possible. That you're not giving a ton of notes, and that you're not you're not expressing anything but being pleased with every take, and you just build on the takes. And that said, it's like Allison didn't even need any like extra special treatment because she was fantastic from day one.
Yeah, I follow a lot of sports, and I would put an analogy out there like this. It may be easier to direct somebody new than it is a veteran, only because, let's say in sports, the longer that player has been playing, the less coaching they probably even want to hear.
Well, I mean, I think it just goes actors for an actor. I mean, it's a great thing that you bring up, but you just never know your expectations when you're dealing with someone who is super established. It could often, you have the director have the feeling of like, oh, what am I going to tell? What can I possibly tell Billy Bob Thornton? The guy's so fantastic. But I think you'll also find that there are actors who are incredibly accomplished and talented like that who still want to hear, they still want input. They still want to know that someone is watching the performance and they can be collaborative. So, I mean, for me, that's like one of the great pleasant surprises, of doing what I do, is that when you all of a sudden you're working with someone who's kind of an icon and they're gracious and collaborative on set, and I also think that when the number one on the call sheet behaves like that, it trickles down through the whole production, sets a tone.
I can well imagine, yeah. Now, we talked to Noah Hawley a few weeks ago, and obviously your showrunner wrote all of the episodes. He's also nominated as a producer and a writer for this. Just talk about working with him and setting this whole project in motion with the first episode, which you're nominated for.
Well, I mean, there's just a lot of discussions. I think that we, because we had so much lead time and then we had so much time in Canada beforehand, it also gave us a lot of time to talk through the script, to explore the script together. We didn't have a super luxurious schedule. We certainly had a more wiggle room in our schedule than the people that had to come after and do it on an episodic basis. Because we had the pilot, we had a little more breathing room. But we were doing like a 90-minute pilot and the first episode in about 21 days. So, on set, there was not the luxury of like spending an hour talking it through with the actor. It was still like shooting on a TV schedule, but I think that because there were so many extensive discussions prior to photography, that when we actually did get to the set and started executing it, it went very smoothly because everyone was on the same page.
And the other directors that follow you, this is a little different than a series that's potentially ongoing for years and years. I mean, it just got picked up, but it is a mini series on this first 10. So the ones that followed you all did multiples as well. Did they consult you on the mood and the feel and how you decided certain decisions, or how does that work?
Can you back that one up again? I'm so sorry.
The directors that followed you, they all did
I see. Sorry.
Hours.
Well, I think that I was friendly with a couple of the directors that came after, but to be perfectly honest, I think that it was such a specific style that we set up for the show. It even went down to like what focal lengths on the lenses we were going to use, that I think that it was pretty easy for the people that came afterwards to look at what had been done and to kind of, sort of work in that realm, and bring their own perspective to it. But I think the parameters were well enough set up, and also there were the people that continued. I was just there for the first couple episodes, but there was a group of producers that continued through the entire 10. So obviously, the newer directors could rely on those people as well.
And what obviously, and we talked to Noah about this from his perspective, from a writing and producing perspective, but for you, looking back at the Coen Brothers movie, did you rely on that in terms of setting up your style?
Well, that's a really great question, because obviously we did look at Fargo, the original movie, which is, fantastic. It's almost a perfect movie. But, when you read the script for the pilot, there are a lot of different things happening in there. I mean, I think what's so clever about the script is that it wasn't just taking Fargo the movie and spinning it out on an episodic basis with Marge having a new criminal every week. Instead, it was sort of like a more complex blending of the original movie, No Country for Old Men, and other influences sleeping in there, and other bits and pieces of other Coen brothers movies. So, I think what I ended up referring to it was No Country for Old Fargo, because when I looked at the Coen movies, the one that I gravitated towards most closely from a stylistic point of view was No Country for Old Men, because for me it was Coen Brothers 2.0. It wasn't Coen Brothers operating like on a very slim budget. It was the Coen Brothers sort of like at the height of their style, operating with more resources, and basically every shot in that movie is a treat. It's the original movie obviously has a very great spare style, but part of that maybe is came out of like what an extremely tight budget they were working on. And then if you look at No Country, there's just a lot more richness and variety to the visual treatment. So I think that when I was thinking about how to shoot that, I took my cues a little bit more from No Country. The other great thing about both those movies is that the color palettes are like extremely controlled and very, very designed, and you don't really notice it until you're looking for it. So we sort of borrowed that idea for Fargo the series and designed a color palette that was, based on the Fargo movie, but then we had other things going on, like we were shooting a whole storyline in Duluth, so we designed a Duluth color palette, so to try to give the audience kind of like a subliminal visual cue of where they were, where the story was taking them.
Since you had so many months to work on it and think about things and kind of get your act together in a big way, tell us maybe something that made the final project that you really debated over and you're really proud about. Or the reverse of that, something that we never saw that you really all thought about maybe putting in there.
Well, I have to say the one thing is that from the very beginning, like 7 months out, we were talking about the deer, like the scene where Billy Bob's character hits a deer and gets out of the car and watches the deer's last moments and turns around and the guy in the underwear runs into the woods. And we really there was a lot of discussion about the car, if it was going to roll, if it was just going to pancake. And we went out to shoot this scene the first time, and and I did storyboards for it, and we were trying to get all our ducks in the row. And then the very first time we went out to try to shoot that scene, it was actually physically so cold that everything froze, including the toilets. We actually couldn't shoot that day. So we had to come back maybe a month later to shoot that sequence. And the most fortuitous thing that happened was that this car was designed to leave the road. He's driving, he hits the deer, and the car flies off the road. And the stunt guy had sort of designed it so that the car would leave the road and then begin to spin. And then we figured, okay, the car might flip over, and then it's going to be like a turtle. It's going to end up on its roof. And then we'll have to kind of do some tricky cut to flip it one more time to get it to land in just the perfect place. And what ended up happening was that we rolled the cameras. We had 3 cameras going, and this car hit the ramp, and it didn't roll at all. It just kind of flew through the air, and then it just pancaked down in exactly the right spot. It's one of those things like in Breaking Bad where Walter White throws the pizza on the roof. Everyone asks, how do you do that? That was just literally like Bryan Cranston threw a pizza on the roof and it landed in just the right spot. It was just sort of like one of those insanely lucky moments. So
it's the happy accidents in probably any project that you wind up remembering.
Yeah, that was a very happy accident.
If you'd shot that sequence like you wanted to a month earlier, maybe it's not anything like what you wanted.
That is absolutely correct.
You have to just go with the flow on those kinds of things. Well, tell me how you've done a lot of TV. I was looking over your profile on the internet, and how do you go about? How do you know that a project's right for you and you want to take it on? Because I'm sure you get a lot of offers.
It largely comes off of the script. I think that I've been lucky in my career because I've got to do 1-hour dramas and I've got to work on comedies, but I guess my favorite zone, my favorite area, my wheelhouse is sort of that Fargo wheelhouse, which is a mixed tone project where it's harrowing and it's scary and then it has funny moments too, and I just sort of love that kind of material, and so I guess, primarily I'll just look at, does the sensibility of the material sort of match what I'm good at, and then I'll look at, are there chances to do fun visual things? Is it a piece of material that lends itself to getting to flex your visual muscles? And the third thing I'll look at, does it shoot close to where I live?
I don't think this one met that last qualification.
It didn't, unfortunately.
But even when I watched the very first one all the way through the end, I mean, that environment, those conditions, that weather, really, it was like another character.
The snow was the snow was probably one of the reasons that we selected to shoot in Calgary, because it was obviously in Canada, and it was a place that got snow early in the season. Calgary also has a weather pattern they call the Chinooks, where warm air comes over the mountains and melts everything. So although we had snow right when we needed it, when we started shooting in November, we were constantly living in fear of everything melting because of the Chinooks. But our luck held out until the very last week when it got warm and everything melted. I mean, literally in Calgary, it can go from like -30 to like 50 degrees in the course of a week. So we lost all our snow, and then we had to like shut down for a couple days, and then an enormous blizzard arrived, and we were so happy that we could finish. But that blizzard also brought the -30-degree weather that made us shut down.
Well, last time you were at the Emmys was off of the premiere season of 30 Rock. You won an Emmy as part of that team, and a lot of people don't realize you directed the pilot and several other episodes. Tell us about setting up that show and working with Tina Fey and her team.
It couldn't have been more fun. I mean, so Tina was, when we were prepping that, Tina not only wrote the pilot, but she was also obviously acting in the whole thing. So she had like a pretty good burden. And for me, it was like a really fun collaboration. Helping to realize it. I sort of had like an idea with that I didn't want to just shoot it like a comedy. That in order to make everything seem slightly more real, I wanted to shoot it almost like it was a cop show. I ended up putting it together, a great bunch of people on the pilot, including a guy named Pete Aliata, who had met as a camera operator on Law and Order, and I thought, how great if I just shoot a comedy like a Law and Order. And so the production designer, everyone part of that group was tremendous, and it was a lot of fun to kind of be on the ground floor and put that together.
I think projects that TV series or movies or whatever that are those behind the scenes kind of projects are difficult because it's hard to make hallways and offices interesting.
That is correct. I mean, we sort of spent a lot of time at the actual 30 Rock building at Studio 8H, whatever, the classic studio where you shoot that, and I definitely hung out there for weeks just trying to soak everything up so that we could replicate that stuff on stage. And then Alec Baldwin's character, sort of had like a beautiful office that was supposed to be on the 18th floor of a skyscraper, and that's something we actually had to build. Because we were afraid that if we shot in the real skyscraper, once it got dark, it would be dark. And we only had Alec Baldwin for that day.
Yeah, you can control everything much better when you do it yourself.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, I remember I was at TCA week back when when they were doing the debut and all of that. I remember seeing the unaired pilot, which you made several changes before it got to NBC, to actually airing on NBC, and including a couple of casting additions. Talk about how you and Tina and the others knew to make changes between the unaired pilot and what became the actual series.
I was involved in reshooting the changes, but I think the discussions about what the changes were going to be sort of happened at the Lorne Michaels, Tina Fey, NBC level. all those discussions. And sort of then when I came back and we ramped up the series, we sort of reshot portions of the pilot to accommodate those changes.
But you agreed with them. You felt like also that we need to make some nips and tucks here and make a few changes to make this even better.
Yeah, I mean, obviously when you direct the pilot, you sort of fall in love with everyone in the pilot, and you don't want to see stuff go. But I guess from a long-term perspective, I understood, the things that they wanted to do, but I wasn't directly involved in all the discussions about that stuff.
Well, that takes a lot of guts, really, to make changes, because whatever is that first episode that the mass public sees, that's their first vision of you forever and ever and ever, just like first impressions when you meet people. So yeah. that takes a lot of guts to go in and say, we need to fix this, we need to fix that.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's sort of things they just wanted to do, when they were thinking about the whole thing going forward. But I think the trickiest thing with that was that, the Baldwin's character was so obviously so pivotal in the whole relationship, and I think he just did the pilot as a guest star initially, and then he
did it as Tina and I talked a couple of years ago, and he did it as a favor to her as well as Lorne Michaels, and wasn't actually signed on when they picked up the series.
Not at all, and they picked up the series on condition that he would do at least the first 9 of the first year. So he signed on for the first 9 or the first 12, whatever it is, and when you're on a network season. And then they got to Christmas, and then it was like they lured him into doing the back 9, and I think it was like sort of like a constant, and I think eventually he signed up for the whole thing, but it wasn't a done deal at the beginning.
Right. Just a couple more questions. I was looking over. I mean, you've done a ton of Showtime shows. You've pretty much directed episodes for almost every show they've had over on Showtime. Why do you like working with that network?
Oh, they're just a smart bunch of people, and they great taste. And the shows I've been on, they give the showrunner, the person who's writing the show, give them a lot of room to make the show that they want to make, and and then also from a directing point of view, when you're doing stuff that's premium cable, it's there are fewer constraints on content and fewer constraints on running time and all that kind of stuff. So it's always ends up being more kind of a more liberating thing for a director when you're working in that medium.
And from what you mentioned earlier, you love that dramatic shows that have drama and comedy in them, and almost all of those do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's something great about the cable half-hour comedy is a completely different animal from a network half-hour comedy, because if you think of Nurse Jackie or Californication or Bored to Death, like the amazing HBO show, there's those shows are just they're so wonderful because yes, they are largely funny, but then they have all these other flavors, and they don't have to. They're not constrained by having to deliver X number of jokes a minute. They're sort of more like funny short films. So that might be my favorite area, is the half-hour grown-up cable comedy.
And I got to ask you about our. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And those you only have to shoot for 5 days.
Oh, okay. A very tight leash on those. Our website and so many people around the world love Breaking Bad. You did 8 episodes earlier on. This is its final go-around at the Emmys. Just tell us a quick story maybe about working on that show.
I mean, that show, I'm back in New Mexico right now doing their next incarnation, but that creatively, probably that show is, one of the best experience I've ever had. I knew Vince because I was lucky enough to get paired with him to do a pilot called Battle Creek that he wrote, I think maybe 10 years ago. It was a CBS pilot, and we were prepping it together in Vancouver, and then when we got back to LA to do the casting, the network sort of decided it just wasn't what they wanted to do at that point. So we had sort of spent all this time together, and then we never actually got to shoot together. And then subsequently, I just heard a rumor that he had a new show that he was doing for AMC, and I called him up and I just said, look, whatever you got going on, I'd love to work on it. And then I got to Vince did this amazing pilot for Breaking Bad, and then I got to do the first 2 episodes after the pilot. And I just thought, like, the bar is so high. It's a scary job. But I just, fell in love with working in New Mexico, and just, the quality of the writing, and then, Vince's sensibility is just has that tone that I appreciate, where it's harrowing, and it's suspenseful, and it's tense, and it's also very funny at times. And the other thing that makes it great from a directing point of view is that Vince is an incredibly visual writer, and things are sort of written with the visuals in mind. So, and he consciously just doesn't want things to look like a TV show. So it's both super challenging and also really rewarding when you can pull it off.
And it was just announced a couple of weeks ago that there will be another incarnation of Fargo, set probably in the 1970s. Do you know yet if you'll be involved in that?
Well, I'm trying to, as I mentioned, I'm trying to stay close to home, but it sounds like a really great idea for an extension of that show.
Okay, well, I guess we'll know down the road. It's not going to be right away since it was just announced. So anyway, well, good luck at the Emmys. You got a really good shot there on that directing category, and you might go 2 for 2.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye-bye.